The SciComm Collective acknowledges the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation as the traditional custodians of the lands we study, write and record on, and their sovereignty was never ceded. Hello and welcome to the SciComm Collective.
Different useful knowledge in different areas.
The joy is sharing it, making science accessible, the ignored final step of the scientific method.
Every different perspective.
Science is culture.
The SciComm Collective, bringing science and science communication to you.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the SciComm Collective. My name is Kate and I'm joined by
Emma,
as well as our guests today who are...
I'm Rose.
And I'm Rocky.
Thank you so much for joining us. We've got you here today because you know a thing or two about podcasting. And
What's that?
What's that? And we're doing a series called The Summer Shorts. So to get things going, Rocky, how would you like to introduce yourself?
So I'm Rocky. The line I like to use is that I'm a jack of all trades and a master of science communication.
I am totally stealing that.
You can't copyright trademark me. Currently, I work at the International Centre for Radio Astronomy Research. But as far as my podcasting creds go, I helped start the SciTech Planetarium podcast, the audio guide to the galaxy, which is still going. Yay. Very proud of that. And I also, far more relevant for this particular group, I also have taught in SCOM2205, which now includes the podcast unit. So I have taught and assessed many student podcasts.
including me.
Including Emma.
Is this just an effort to boost grades?
It was a year ago, so I think it's okay now.
Okay, we're in the clear.
Yeah. And Rose, how would you like to introduce yourself?
So I'm Rose Kerr. I'm a producer for ABC Science, which sits under ABC Radio National. And if we want to go beyond technical titles, I would say I'm a podcaster, content creator, science journalist. I've hosted and produced the Particle podcast with Rocky, and I've hosted and produced podcasts for the Royal Botanic Gardens in Sydney. And most recently, over on Instagram, I've been starting to make some gardening, botany videos because, fun fact, that's what my first degree was in, was botany and conservation biology here at UWA.
And your second degree was?
I did a graduate diploma in broadcasting a couple of years later over at ECU.
Great. So to kick things off...
Before we get into it, I brought some beers. Can I open one?
Yes! It is summer shorts after all.
I'm going to... There you go. You can now diversify into ASMR. I have two. Does anybody else want one?
I will have one. You do your own Foley work as well. That's excellent. The beers are warm, by the way.
They're warm.
They're warm, just as that scene.
Peek behind the curtain.
Sorry, Emma. Go ahead.
I don't know. I don't know where to go with this right now. Because, I just love that you just brought sound, a different type of sound to the kinds of sounds that we've been doing so far.
Yeah. I'm going to jump straight in. So when I was marking this 2205 podcasts, that was always my favorite thing to hear students do. I am an absolute sucker for a podcast that does something fun with sound. So anyone who is doing things about bioacoustics or
I did mine on misophonia.
Yes,
cool.
I do remember that one. And you made this amazing wall of sound that was this is how it feels to have this, what would we call it, a sensation, this particular symptom.
So overwhelmed by a sound.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I was like, wow, I absolutely get this thing that is otherwise a very difficult thing to understand. But the other one that I really liked from your class, and we are just blatantly playing favourites now, is there was a student who answered a question that I had always had. It's, if you've ever walked behind the building that we're in right now, there is a thing that goes weep, weep, weep.
Like a bird?
No, like a machine in the basement. I went behind there and I recorded it before we started.
A crying machine.
Yeah, so it's the one that sounds... Hold on. It's the one that sounds like... I'll just send you this sound file. Sure. You can patch it in later.
Sounds like there's gremlins inside a computer.
So this was how he started his podcast. He was if you've ever walked behind the physics building at UWA, you would have heard this sound. And I was like, I have walked behind the physics building at UWA and I have heard that sound. And he was like, I'm going to tell you what it is. And then he did this beautiful little walkthrough where you hear all the like door beeps and the stairs, and he walks us down into the basement, and you find out that, yes, it's a giant cryogenic chiller.
No way.
And so it's just like a massive giga fridge. And the way he described it was really cool too. It was like, he says it hangs from the roof like a giant icicle. So it was just this beautiful piece of like using this piece of sound to tell a story, which I think is, if I ever end up marking this unit again, that is a way. Just straight to an HD if you find something cool sounding to put in there.
Or follow Rocky around and try to figure out what he's been thinking about.
I love it because it's like how you're telling a story that's science related, but it's actually making use of the medium of podcasting. That's awesome.
I mean, you answered the question that we have is, how do you evaluate a podcast? What makes a good podcast?
Yeah, I mean...
We're good, obviously.
I have a rubric, but I don't know, Rose, do you have vibes? Because I just go off what the rubric says because I'm a good marker. But I feel like you'll be less structured. You'll have more like...
Yeah, the real
thoughts.
world.
Yeah, I find it really challenging because my personal view on it is that to a certain degree, how much you enjoy a podcast is subjective, and it does depend person to person. Things that I love, you know, you're all not necessarily going to love. But things in particular that I really love to hear in a podcast is when people who are hosting or reporting or producing whatever role that they have, figuring out what is special about their perspective. And I mean, again, personal taste, I don't like too much self-insertion. However, I do like when people really relax into what makes them them. And whether that's, you know, they've taken inspiration from lots of different shows, but they're making sure they're not just trying to be who they think they need to be. I really enjoy, hearing authenticity.
Yeah. A lot of the times the best comments I get are after the camera's off or after they think the camera's off.
Sneaky tricks.
Yeah. When people don't think they're being recorded or forget that they're being recorded or can finally just like unclench a little bit and have a chat instead of trying to present, that is when you get the best stuff.
I mean, you bring beer, right?
That's so true. It was something I was thinking about on the drive up here, was that something that's really special about podcasting is, especially when you're working with people who might not have been interviewed before, the fact that you don't have the camera on all the time. Like, I prefer working without cameras. Hopefully, it does take a little bit of that element of fear out of the room and people can relax and feel like they are just on the phone. I think that is something that puts podcasting in like a different lane to other forms of science communication. You're not in front of a crowd, and podcasting for the introverts out there or people who are a little bit uncomfortable, I think podcasts are a really nice avenue for that.
On that, when I took science presentation, we learnt that how the barrier to entry into podcasts is so low. I was just wondering, broad comment to the table, why is this medium so cool? Assuming that you do think it's cool. And also, why is it such a valuable tool to have in a science communicator's toolkit?
I think one of the reasons that podcasts are a really cool thing to be able to say that you can do is, yes, you don't need a lot to get started. What you need is a quiet place and something to record with. And if you have an office and a phone or can book an office and a phone, you're probably most of the way there. Now, that won't get you something that sounds beautiful, but as long as you're not hurting people's ears, I think you would be surprised with how much you can get away with. And my favorite thing to do on that front is to find a podcast that you really like. Not necessarily one that like started on radio and has been podcasted later, but like a grassroots podcast, two dudes in a shed type situation. Go back to their very, very first episode and listen to how trash it sounded. And all of these now have, millions of listeners and people are really into them and they sound great now. But if you go back to that first episode, the stuff that they got started with sounds like absolute garbage. And
even like the things that they say as well, and like the way that people discuss things, and you can totally hear.
Absolutely. Like no mic discipline, talking over each other all the time, like all sorts of stuff. And yet somehow they still take off and they continue to take off,
What's that magic? What is it that's leading to people that then get millions of listens?
I think every podcast ever would love to know the answer to that.
Yeah, if I knew that,
Yeah,
I would not
be
be
unstoppable.
here. Sorry, guys.
I'd be living on a yacht, living the high life. I think on that idea of anyone can start it, it is really special that it is something that you don't have to have the best camera. You can start on your own. And I think something that makes podcasting special is it's like this little package that you can give to people. And even if only 3 people listen to it, it's such like an intimate thing to have someone listening to your voice or your project. And the fact that they can take it with them anywhere, doesn't matter where in the world that they are. And I was thinking about this as you're speaking, Rocky, podcasting and like podcasts you can listen to on any platform. You're not on social media. And so sometimes I think that's really nice about podcasting is you're not trying to create the next viral video. You're making something that you're proud of and you're excited for people to listen to. And you're not, if someone seeks you out, they're not like finding you in a feed. And I think that that's cool as well.
Not everyone's listening. You are trying to find out your niche.
Yeah.
And trying to find that specific subset of people who will absolutely love your stuff. And you're broadcasting but narrowcasting to those specific people.
Yeah, that's nice. Kind of reminds me of like old school YouTube days.
Yes.
Where someone would be filming in their bedroom and it's just they're having a chat and then they're able to build, you know, maybe it's only an audience of 10 people or maybe it's 1 million. It's that closeness to the creator that I think is really nice.
There's an article that I'll send you that you can put in your show notes.
Excellent.
Because I know we love an article for the show notes.
Oh, yes.
We totally do.
Wherever you get your podcasts is a radical statement. The fact that every podcast is on multiple platforms and that's the default. And you can get your podcasts wherever you get your podcasts. And in this media landscape, this social media, this digital media landscape, like that is actually an extremely radical statement. And it is frankly shocking that it has stuck around this long. And you can see the tech platforms trying to claw their way in there. But this idea that, you know, this is an open platform. It's literally just a website with a specially formatted file and
The RSS feeds.
Right. And you point the right type of software at it and it's bang, it's a podcast. Like it's this little time capsule of an old version of what the internet was supposed to be. And it is radical. It is an anti sort of algorithmic, anti sort of having your message controlled kind of statement to say wherever you get your podcasts.
And also it's really sweet sometimes. Well, I like to reflect on how nice it is that it does kind of, it's the modern day version of when people did used to listen to the radio a lot more. And I like how, you know, anyone can find them and listen to them. Like my grandpa, he still listens to podcasts that I make, whether it's either on the radio or he'll download them to his phone. And I love that, yeah, it's not just for the super online people. Podcasting does hark back to really early radio days, and I think that's really nice.
Yeah, well, for me, when I started podcasting, it was so I could listen to the ABC radio shows that I didn't catch. So, yeah, I find the whole idea, like podcasting, as you say, Rocky, is on the premise of the Web 2.0 that information is meant to be shared for everyone. So I really like that it remains.
And I like what you were saying about how there are different audiences, that different people can access it. Because that's one of the things we talk about in SciComm is the accessibility of putting your stuff out there. You know, I guess we're all still speaking in English, but there are podcasts out there in multiple languages as well that you can access on these same platforms, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah, Rocky, you mentioned before how it was 2 guys in a shed. So I think you know the answer to this question, but what is the collective now for a group of podcasters?
Is it a well, actually?
Yappers, full-time yappers.
Well, actually, I know you could joke that it is basically white millennial dudes. And sorry, Rocky, you do come under that category. But where is the diversity in podcasting? And do you have to be speaking English in order to succeed? Or where is the scope for diversity and accents in this medium?
Did you say accents or access?
Both access and accents.
Good question.
I think podcasting is interesting because, as you've said, anyone can kind of start one up.
However, you think of the main top 10.
Well, yeah, you do think of the top 10 and there is a certain skew there. And I think it's probably interesting that it's dominated by people who already had a platform like your Hamish and Andy types.
Yes.
But then you look at who is coming up through, the independent media kind of space. I know my wife listens the heck out of Shameless, right? And I don't think those are voices or topics or approaches to those topics that would get radio play.
Absolutely.
Certainly not traditionally. So, statistically, I think there is still a big problem. But I think one of the beautiful things about it is that it gives some amazing counterexamples a chance to shine. Podcast is one of the places where we can play around with being better and see what being better might look like. Because it's easy to say, oh, be better, do better. But it's like, okay, well, what does better look like?
To further what Rocky has said, I do think one cool thing that podcasts can try to do is make more transcripts. So, you can use AI software to transcribe podcasts. You obviously need to then go and fix them. I've seen so many mistakes in AI transcription podcasts. I think that is a cool way to hopefully bring podcasts to an audience who may not be able to listen to them.
Rocky, you and I both did linguistics, so we have thoughts on accents as it is. But when podcasting, is it important to speak English? And is there more than one type of podcaster, I should say?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. Just like with anything SciComm, it's about your audience. So if you know that the people you want to reach are going to be listening in English, you should be speaking in English. But if you're trying to reach people in a particular, culturally or linguistically diverse community, stuff can be more authentic if it's coming to them in their own language, because so much of our identity is tied up in language. Mm. I don't know. In terms of accents, I don't think it matters. It's never been a problem for me marking podcasts. It's always been much more about, did you tell a good story? Did you, as I said, find something interesting for me to listen to?
Teach me something new.
Teach me something new. Find some interesting noises.
I love fun facts.
I love fun facts and weird sounds. But your accent is not one of the things that I'm listening for. And I would argue, shouldn't be.
I like it. It kind of reminds me of how we talk about TV and how TV and media has increased the diversity of its people that we're seeing face to face. It's being able to hear different voices as well.
Yeah, like literally hearing different voices is
kind of inclusive.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think the best kinds of presenters or podcast hosts, whatever you want to call them, are people who strike a balance between making sure that they sound like themselves and they can, if a family member listened to it, they'd be like, yeah, that's your voice and I recognize you in that. And then also kind of giving that little extra oomph to it. So if someone out there is concerned that their voice doesn't sound like the voices that they have heard either on the radio or on TV or in podcasts, that can be really a special thing to bring, because you should have your voice out there. We should have as many different voices as we can across all forms of media. And I would say to anyone who's like, oh, I hate listening to my own voice, you do get used to it. I'm at the point now where I have done projects kind of more in the pop culture space with friends. And when I listen back to them now, they still make me giggle. Like I'll giggle at my own jokes, which is so narcissistic. But
I completely understand. Yeah, I do the same thing.
You will get used to it. And I would say wherever you can, steer away from hard scripting. Try to give yourself loose scripting or write exactly how you speak. That's what I personally do, which does make anyone who's working with me think I'm a little bit, what's the word?
Millennial?
I'm actually a cusper. I have no allegiance.
Because you say things like that. That's how you sound when you write.
Literally. And I just think I personally don't connect to the traditional newscaster style voice. That's not something that I enjoy. I think when you can hear someone's emotions and their tone and their whole personal history in the way that they speak, I think that's a really wonderful thing. And there's a lot of room to improve your presenting style. If I listen to my first podcast, when I worked with Rocky and we did the Particle podcast, I am positive if I listen to that now, I would be like, oh my goodness, that is horrible. But it doesn't matter, because you can grow your style. You'll find what works for you. Sometimes you might shoot too far and you'll listen back and you'll go, wow, that doesn't sound like me. I've played something for my partner before and he said, doesn't sound like you anymore. And so I think trust that, you know, in the world, there's lots of different types of voices. And so whether you record it or whether you're speaking out loud, your voice is your voice. So definitely don't be afraid to put it out there. If anything, just keep practicing so you can gain confidence that your sentences are making sense, that you're being clear, you're not talking too fast, all of those things. Embrace those parts and improve those, but don't worry about the things that you can't change.
Yeah. And like that, like, don't try to be perfectionist about it. Just put it out there because we've all got something important to say.
And that's what we're doing with the SciComm Collective. Which is
That's the name of the show.
But
oh my goodness, they said the name of the movie.
I think just the one thing I like to add on that when I do teach this is, for those of you who find comfort in science, the bone structures in your face mean that your voice sounds different inside your skull to how it does outside it.
Yeah.
So when you're recording your voice and playing it back and you're listening to it and you think, oh my God, I hate that. It's like, actually, you're just not used to it. And that's how you sound to everyone all the time. So when you play that back for your peers and for your friends and for your family, they don't think it sounds different. They think it sounds like you. And that's really cool. It's really cool to be able to hear yourself as other people hear you. And so just remember that, like, because of the physics of the way you experience sound, you're always hearing your own voice from inside the literal echo chamber of your own skull. So don't worry that you sound different, because I promise you, to everyone else, you sound like yourself.
Yeah. And if you sound different, then that's cool and unique, and that's who you are, and you bring your life experiences, and all of that is in your voice. And if you need to practice, I still to this day practice scripts when I'm driving, which obviously pay attention to the road, but having conversations to yourself in that little soundproof space, I don't know why, but it really helps me get out of that, like, how you hear your voice in your own head. Sometimes if I'm standing at my desk and I'm reading a script as I'm writing it, there's something about taking that into another space altogether that helps you get used to what your voice sounds like. And I don't know, you can pretend you're on the radio. It's kind of fun.
I like that. Actually, a journo did once tell me a great space to record in is inside the car.
Yeah.
It's actually how we even call them about the artist car seat headrest got their name.
Oh, wow.
Because they record all their stuff in the back seat of their car.
I was on
because it was nice and quiet.
I mean, it's true. I was on a road trip around the country a couple of years ago, and outside of work, I was doing a podcast about pop culture and social media, and I was in a caravan park in Broome in the car with my podcast gear trying to hotspot my laptop to connect to my friend who was in Perth and record the podcast on the road, which was pretty cool and kind of goes to show you really can do it from anywhere. You just really need good internet connection.
I like that because, like, we got you guys to come all the way to UWA to sit in this lovely studio, but, like, we could potentially have done this anywhere.
If you are recording anywhere, though, always record a little bit of just the sound without anyone speaking so you can cover up your edits. That took me a long time to learn.
Oh, are we doing tips?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Let's do it. Hot tip, always record some of the background sound because...
My flip side background sound tip is you can get away with anything as long as you make it part of the story. So if you are somewhere where there's traffic noise, you say, I'm walking down the street in Perth, right? If you're somewhere that there's lots of birds, you say, like, I'm in Kings Park having a picnic and I noticed. So as long as you can explain the background sound that people are hearing, it's like horrible, beeping or whatever, not as good. But if you can make the sound around you part of the story, you don't need to sound perfect. You can make that a part of what, makes it authentic and cool.
And my hot tip would be, it's kind of twofold, get a thick skin for cutting content, because podcasting can be subjective and you might receive some feedback to cut something that you loved, and you've just got to learn to just go, okay, cool, and roll with it. Like, it can break your heart, but it's really important to just let it go. And especially if podcasting is something you want to continue with, you're going to make lots of stuff. You're going to make lots of stuff. And sometimes cutting things down for brevity will mean that more people will stick around and listen to it.
My favorite thing to do on that front is when I really, really like a bit, but I can tell it just doesn't belong, I will like clip it out and save it somewhere else.
Oh, that's nice.
And so I have my little like personal box of favorites, and I'm like, I get to keep those. Those are just for me.
Yeah.
And then I put the one out that into the world that, you know, has to go out there, but I always have my own version. I almost never go back and listen to them, but I like being able to have, you know, this is the version that I made and like I'm happy with it, and now it can be edited and become how it needs to be.
So they're the Turkish delights in the box, right?
I regret not saving more when I was first starting out. On a hard drive somewhere, I'm sure I've got copies of things I've worked on that don't necessarily exist on the internet anymore, but I do wish I had have kept more little keepsakes from all the projects that I've worked on, because you might in 5 years think, oh my goodness, that's so embarrassing. But it's really, really nice to be able to look back and see how far you've come or what you've done, especially in a industry or a media where how many listeners do you have is like so important, or how perfect's your audio. All that stuff can be, you know, outside determinants of success. It can be nice to have just a little collection of moments that you were proud of. And then also you don't forget all the stuff you've worked on. When we did the Particle podcast, I used to remember all the fun facts from all the episodes we'd done, and it was amazing, and it was great for quiz nights.
Oh my God, that's adorable.
Oh, it was so handy. I used to just remember them because it was what I had done recently. But nowadays I can't remember it all, which is a little bit of a shame. So if you are starting out and you're enjoying it, keep those little keepsakes and stuff like Rocky was saying.
Make yourself a highlights reel.
Yeah.
Doesn't even have to go anywhere. Just like keep it for you.
Yeah, just for you.
You might just have to go back and listen to your first episodes again.
Oh, I listened to one once. I can't remember why. Maybe I was including it in a show reel or something. But I was like, oh, wow, I edited that in a rush. I really kept some things in there that should have been cut out. That's okay. Actually, a tip if you are looking to do interviews, whether that casual conversation like we've had today, when you're asking questions, try really hard not to refer back to previous answers or previous questions, because otherwise you struggle to edit them out. And if you catch an interviewee saying, as I said earlier, if you can try to get them to reintroduce that or just cut it out. I say these things, but it's so hard to remember them in the moment, especially if you're interviewing someone that you're quite nervous to interview. I'll forget to get someone to introduce themselves sometimes, and that's okay.
Our very first intro episode, none of us students said our names.
Oh, whoops. That's okay.
We are disembodied voices.
Yeah.
We are the collective.
Yeah.
It was
That's
good
very
though.
Borg.
And that was only 7 main episodes ago, so kind of too far to go to look back.
Like, it is amazing how quickly you get better.
Yeah.
How do we get better? How do you evaluate a podcast?
I like hearing as a show grows, hearing the presenters get more comfortable. So whether that's speaking in a more natural way, being less reliant on notes, I think that can take, regardless of your equipment, regardless of your setup, that can really elevate a podcast from the first one you've ever done to the 10th one you've ever done. Because you're not always going to be able to commit to better equipment or find a better place to record, or, you know, you might not have access to your dream guests yet, but what you can do is start sounding more natural. And I think that that's a really cool thing that you can work on for yourself.
I think, again, when I'm evaluating podcasts for SCOM, I have a rubric, and it's actually a pretty good rubric. So if you're looking for something which has just got some tips on what good audio storytelling is, you could do a lot worse than aiming for the high distinction column. But the thing that I've noticed for myself in making a podcast, again, it's nothing to do with audio, it's nothing to do with sound. The show that I make as a bit of a hobby, we started out with a pretty clear idea of a structure that we wanted to follow each episode, and it used to take us 2.5, 3 hours to get through that structure.
True.
And now we get through an hour of content in an hour and a half.
Such a good feeling.
Because we can feel when a topic is done and when we need to
Yeah.
move on to the next thing. We don't talk over each other as much. We don't. In the early episodes, we would just spend like half the episode summarizing the thing that the other person had just said. I was like, oh, we don't need to do that because I cut most of that. So that for me, as a measurable thing, is percentage of stuff that makes it into the final show, like the percentage of that I end up having to cut, not because we're trying to keep more, but because we're getting better at doing the show. That has been a really cool thing for me to see as the person who edits the show.
What about, though, like evaluating whether the purpose of the podcast has been met? Like, if we talk about science communication, like, are we using it into the void, or are we finding out whether people are actually taking from the podcast what we are hoping that they are going to take? How do we do that? Can we do that? Or do we just make the best content that we can and hope?
I mean, I have two answers. One of them is that the podcast I make for me, I make for an audience of 2 people, and there's 2 people on the show.
Yeah, I'm the exact same. When I've done hobby podcasts, it's been for the half a dozen friends who listened and said that they enjoyed it. I reckon, I know when I've designed projects outside of work, because I think that can be a really good context to talk in, and a lot of what I've spoken about today has been personal projects, because I think that's a lot more applicable for most podcasts. Most podcasts in the world probably aren't for media organizations or organizations specifically. So with that all in mind, I think in terms of knowing that your audience have gotten the key messages and stuff, when we designed our show, we thought about, we're going to have an intro, these 3 sections, and then our outro. And so knowing that you've hit those parts that you said that you wanted to hit in a good amount of time, the time that you set out for it to take, and you can see that arc that you've created and those elements of the explanation is there. It's like creating key messages, but just for yourself.
Yeah.
Having these goals for yourself that you can listen back and you can go, yep, did the intro, yep, I did my middle section, and yep, I recapped it at the end. That can be an alternative way to look at if you hit the nail on the head and got the job done, you know?
I mean, if you make a podcast, it's all very well to say like, oh, you should make a podcast for this imaginary target audience. But if you make a podcast that you don't like, then your guaranteed audience is 0. And if you make a podcast at least that you like, then you have at least one person who you are hitting. So I don't know. Yeah. I feel like for many projects, that's a good place to start, because then you're guaranteed at least one happy listener, which is yourself.
Like, I think the audience is going to find you.
Yes, right. So to put it like back on that SciComm track, you are going to find the people who like what you do, and they're going to find you. And one of the nice things about podcasts is that, as Heather likes to say, they can be very intimate. It does feel parasocial. It does feel friendshipy. And so they are the kinds of things where, you know, you can ask people in your audience for feedback. You can look at things like, if we ask people what topics they're interested in, do they write in? And do they write in with things that are going to be on brand for the podcast, right? If we put an episode of SciComm Collective out and we were like, what would you like us to cover? And they're like, I really want you to talk about sharks. It's like, we need to do a better job at understanding what the purpose of the podcast is, because we're not doing science communication. We're talking about science communication, right? Like things like that, where are you getting the response at all?
Agreed.
You know, are you connecting with people? And then are the responses that you're getting kind of the answers to the questions that you're asking as part of the show? I think that can go a long way to evaluating whether or not your show is doing what you think it's doing. And the bonus is that it gets you more episode ideas. And people love to hear it when you talk about their thing. Like it gets you, it's a virtuous cycle there.
100%.
If you put questions out there and you get the kinds of answers that you wish you were getting, or you ask people for questions and they ask the questions that you want them to ask, that kind of alignment is, I think, one of the easiest ways to figure out whether your podcast is doing its thing.
But I also love how you were saying at the beginning, though, you're doing it for you because you've got to have that passion in there. You've got to have the motivation to keep doing it. Yeah. And you've got to you got to start with an audience of 1. You've got to start
because there's no point starting from an audience of 0. If you hate what you're doing, you're never going to, keep doing it.
I love it.
Fantastic. Well, I finished my beer. I don't know about you, but I think that is our cue to get out of here. This is the first episode of our Summer Short series. Thank you very much, Particle, for the name. I judiciously stole it for the SciComm Collective.
To be fair, it probably exists in like a million places.
We took some inspiration.
So what is Summer Shorts? Explain Summer Shorts to me, Kat. Oh, no, I'm hosting.
Turning it back around. The guest is now the interviewer. So the Summer Shorts series is all about interviewing SCOM2205 Science Presentations students, both past and present. And we are asking them about their podcast assignment and what they think about it. We're essentially getting them to do their writer's statement. So in science communication at UWA, Heather loves a good writer's statement. It makes you state your purpose, your audience, and your message. And that's Heather's way of knowing, have you done the thing that you set out to do? So you were talking about earlier having your own key messages. And like, have you done the beginning? Have you done the middle? Have you done the end? And
so Heather being the course coordinator.
Heather, Dr. Heather Bray, our fearless leader.
For those who might be tuning in for the first time.
Yes. And yeah, it's really an opportunity to get very meta and talk about podcasts in a podcast episode. So,
can I ask you guys a question?
Of course.
Totally.
Why do you both like podcasts
Oh my
specifically?
God, that is a great question.
Yeah, because I'm biased in it, just in that, like, you know, it is what I work and have hobbies in, but it's been so long since I've been just a listener, and now you're both making podcasts for the first time, if I'm right. So, like, has what you like about it changed? What do you like about it?
I think it stayed the same for me. I've got the luxury of having my Pocket Cast app, and it tells me the date that I signed up. It's August 2014. It's just before Serial hit. It's such a time capsule. But for me, I love podcasting because I get to do something else at the same time. I get to drive to work. I get to do my chores. I get to do all sorts of things. And you could argue, if you wanted to, that I'm in science communication because of podcasting, because I had this need to fill my brain with fun facts that the mainstream media wasn't giving me. So I find it very interesting being on the other side and seeing how the sausage is being made. And that process is still enjoyable and terrifying. But no, it's really, really cool. I'm looking forward to following in your footsteps.
It's so weird that that's an inspiration to people because we were so just making it up as we went.
Literally. It sounds like there's like a straightforward line to us sitting here, but there really was
There really is
not.
not.
What about you, Emma?
Yeah, what did you want?
Well, it's interesting because I didn't pick podcasting as a first choice of a thing to do this year when we decided to do something as a group. But what I now just love about it is the opportunity to talk to people and hear different voices and different people just getting comfortable about spilling their shit about themselves and what they're doing. And I love those conversations in my day-to-day. So, like, I get to freaking record it and share that. Like, that's amazing.
I was going to say, you get to lock people in a room and make them talk to you.
So I'm constantly curious, and it's fantastic. So that's what I really like about it. So,
I don't know if it helps anyone, but the fact that, you know, if you're interested in making a podcast and you make one, to everyone else who's never made one before, they're going to think it's really cool and they're going to think it's really exciting. And even when I've, like Rocky said, made projects, I mean, I like on the road or from home, and I know that it's not, you know, top quality, to people who have never done it before, they're going to think it's incredible. And that's really nice. Having this little thing that you can give to people is wonderful.
Yeah, shall we say thank you so much
for
coming and talking to us today?
Anytime.
Literally anytime.
Yeah.
I'm so close. We can do this anytime you like.
It was awesome to have you.
Yes.
And if you did enjoy our episode, please do remember to subscribe, check out our social media, website, listen out for the summer shorts that are coming up soon, and we'll catch you next time on the SciComm Collective.
Thanks for listening. Find us online at thescicommcollective.com. That's com with 2 M's. Questions or comments about today's episode? Get in touch on Instagram at the SciComm Collective. The SciComm Collective is supported by UWA's Grand Challenges Impact Grant.